The room froze the moment I stepped over the threshold. Crystal glasses hovered mid-air. A line of silver forks gleamed like a warning under chandelier light. My mother's voice, a soft command in most company, turned brittle around the rim of her champagne flute. Travis looked down at his plate as if the pattern could save him. "Mercedes," my mother said, watching the word land like a stain on her linen tablecloth. My father rose with the patience of a judge between objections. Somewhere, a server cleared his throat, then remembered he didn't exist. Everyone waited to learn whether I did. Before I go on, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever been treated like you didn't matter in your own family, tap that like button, share this with someone who'll understand, and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what comes next. But to understand why that brunch cut so deep, you need to know the way our house taught silence. I grew up in a Boston suburb where porch lights stayed polished and lawns made straight lines like ruled paper. Our colonials came with oak banisters and long driveways, the kind that told delivery drivers to use the side door. My father, Richard Lawson, was the name partner said with respect and wariness. The kind of attorney who could turn an apology into a contract. My mother, Eleanor, hosted charity galas the way other women hosted book clubs. She mastered the smile that suggested both kindness and scarcity, welcome to what you cannot have. In that house worth was weighed in introductions. Affection arrived the way invitations did, embossed and conditional. My brother Travis learned the rules early. He started speaking in my father's cadence before his shoulders had caught up to his suits. It wasn't that he didn't love me. It was that he was graded on how little he needed to. I left for Chicago with a suitcase and a quiet promise to myself I would build a life where dinners felt like meals, not auditions. Numbers made sense to me in a way people didn't, and the hum of markets became a language I could trust. I worked late and slept hard. I learned the color of Lake Michigan at 6 a.m., and that some friends will leave soup at your door with a note that says, "Eat first, explain later." When holidays required flights, I tried to be brave and go. Most years, I was brave enough not to. Then came the engagement. I heard about it the way distant neighbors hear thunder late and through a window. My mother called with that careful brightness she saved for press releases. A Cape Cod proposal, tasteful and exclusive. I said the right things and set my heart to hope. A wedding might be a bridge even if we only met in the middle. Weeks passed. Silence hardened. I saw tuxedo fittings and veil appointments on my mother's social page the way one sees a party from the sidewalk, laughing faces framed by glass. I told myself the invitation was late, the mail unreliable, the list complicated. Then a friend texted a date I hadn't been given. So I flew to Boston on a Saturday morning and walked into our old house like a woman claiming her seat. The bay windows still held their glossy magazines, and the flower arrangements were tall enough to hide behind. Caterers moved like chess pieces along the dining room edge. At the head of the table sat Travis and a woman with pretty posture and patient eyes. Amanda. She looked at me with polite curiosity, confusion flickering behind it. My father folded his napkin. My mother's smile tightened. "What are you doing here?" she asked, as if I'd knocked on the wrong door. "I heard there was a pre-wedding brunch," I said. "Thought I'd surprise you." The table found its breath. Amanda turned to Travis. "You have a sister?" The question sounded harmless until you heard the truth inside it. My brother stared harder at his plate. I watched the back of his throat move. My mother guided me toward my father's study with a hand that looked gentle and felt firm. The door closed behind us with that expensive weight that says nothing leaves. The room smelled like old leather and victories. The shelves were lined with law books no one read and photos of men whose hands never shook. Outside the window, the forsythia had burst early yellow like a warning. "You weren't sent a save the date," my mother said, smoothing a crease that wasn't there because you won't be receiving an invitation. There are sentences that land and then land again, as if your body needs a second to believe it's been struck. I stared at her, then at my father, who had taken his place behind the desk, which he treated like a witness stand. What do you mean? This wedding is important for both families. My father said in the voice he used when letting a junior associate know how replaceable they were. We're not courting complications. Complications? I said, trying to find the floor. I'm his sister. Biologically, yes, my mother replied, the word dressed like a compliment and worn like a bruise. We have to be thoughtful about the guest list. The governor is attending. Several justices. You understand? I did. I understood that love in this house had admission policies. I understood that my job in Chicago advising clients whose portfolios could buy the silver on this table 3 times over, somehow, didn't qualify as contribution. I manage millions, I said softly. You manage other people's money, my father corrected. 1,000 miles from where you were meant to build the Lawson name. He had a gift for making distance sound like betrayal. He wasn't finished. This event is for people who actually contribute to the family's legacy. People we actually love. There it was. The line. The kind of cruelty that sounds tidy because it's rehearsed. Something moved in my chest, an old hinge rusted but not broken. The door opened and Travis stepped in. He looked the way our father looked in photographs, handsome and slightly blurred by approval. Amanda's father appeared in the hallway behind him. Concern arranged carefully on his face. I could hear my mother's party voice in the dining room, smoothing the air. Did you know? I asked Travis. Did you agree to leave me out? He didn't meet my eyes. It's easier this way, he said. You've never really fit. Easier for whom, I asked. For people who forget I exist. Mercedes, my father said, glancing at his watch. We have guests. I thought of childhood forts made from blankets and dining chairs, the way Travis used to crawl in and whisper, we have each other. That's all we need. I thought of the night I worked through until dawn to save a company and its payroll and the voicemail I left for a graduation I missed. I thought of every time I'd forgiven this house because it was the only one I had. I am family, I said, and heard how small the word sounded in a room built to make people feel smaller. Amanda in the doorway now stared at me with worry that seemed real. Her father murmured something about beneficial unions. My mother's hand lifted, then fell. My father's eyes were empty of anything I might recognize. I opened the door to leave, and the sound of careful laughter drifted in from the dining room. The scent of rosemary chicken and old wine. Silver clinked. A server passed me with a tray of blushing grapefruit slices. The world, like the party, went on. In the foyer, our family portrait still hung above the console table. Travis at 8, with his gap-toothed grin, me at 12, trying not to look taller than I felt my parents, crisp and composed. I waited to see if anyone would call my name. No one did. I stepped out into a thin slice of March sunlight and felt the air on my face, the way a swimmer feels the surface. On the sidewalk, a sparrow picked at something left by a guest, a bit of croissant maybe. The hedge whispered in the wind. A car door shut up the block. Small sounds, steady ones. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket like a second heart. I didn't check it. I watched a cloud drag its hem across the roofline and realized my hands were shaking. The taxi pulled up with a soft squeal of brakes. The driver glanced at the house and then at me as if to confirm where I belonged. I gave the hotel address, then pressed my palms flat on my thighs until the tremor passed. We moved through the neighborhood of familiar porches and tasteful wreaths, past the bakery where we used to stop after church, past the park where my father once took a call and forgot we were playing. The city opened wider. The river flashed like a blade. In the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed that smelled faintly of starch and lavender. The quiet was full of things I could finally hear my own breath, The thud behind my ribs, the memory of my mother's voice. This event is only for people we actually love. I poured water into a glass and watched the surface settle. My reflection there, thin and pale with dignity, trying to hold. I took the old photo from my wallet, the one of Travis and me on the beach at Cape Cod. He was 7 sand all over his elbows, hair wild from the wind. I had my arm around his shoulders, like a promise. The sky behind us was the color of pewter before rain. I ran my thumb along the edge until it softened. Somewhere below my window, a delivery truck beeped as it backed into an alley. A door slammed, an elevator hummed. When the first tear slid down my cheek, it surprised me. The second didn't. They came quietly like late guests who know better than to knock. I lay back on the bedspread and stared at the ceiling, where the sprinkler made a neat circle above me. I thought of the table under the chandelier and the way people had looked away. I thought of how humiliation can feel like heat, and then like cold, and how both can burn. Night came early, as it does when you're counting minutes. Streetlight pulled a pale rectangle across the carpet. I listened to footsteps in the hallway, to the ice machine clatter to the elevator doors, sighing open and shut. I didn't call anyone. Sometimes you have to hear the echo of your own name before you trust your voice again. Near midnight, I got up and set my suitcase on the stand. I unzipped it and stared at the clothes I had packed: dark dress, sensible heels, the cardigan my mother once called earnest. I closed it again. My phone lit the room when I lifted it from the nightstand. A message from an old friend asking if I'd heard the date. A comment on my mother's photo of the centerpiece samples stunning choices with 3 exclamation points. I scrolled until the light hurt, and then I turned it face down. The radiator clicked once and fell silent. My throat ached from words I hadn't spoken. I pulled the hotel comforter up and tucked my hand beneath my cheek, the way I did as a child when I wanted to believe the house was listening. It wasn't. But the quiet was. In that soft, ordinary darkness, something shifted the smallest hinge again, a whisper of movement at the base of my ribs. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was the stillness right before a decision knows its own name. I didn't say it out loud. Not then. I just lay there, eyes open to nothing, and felt the shape of leaving. Jasmine was the first person I called after the silence settled. Her voice came through the line like a porch light in fog, steady, familiar. I told her everything while sitting on the hotel floor, knees drawn close, suitcase still unopened. She didn't try to fix it or offer advice. She just listened until my words thinned out into tears, then said softly, "You come home, okay? We'll take care of you here." The word home startled me. It didn't mean Boston anymore. It meant Chicago brick buildings, Lake Wind, the small circle of people who asked how I really was and stayed long enough to hear the answer. When my flight touched down that evening, the city lights looked gentler than I remembered. Rain had just stopped, and the pavement shone like polished slate. I rode to my apartment with my forehead against the window, watching droplets race one another down the glass. Inside, the air smelled faintly of jasmine tea and the sandalwood candle I'd forgotten to blow out days earlier. The stillness wrapped around me like a heavy coat. I placed my phone face down on the counter, slipped off my shoes, and let myself cry. Not the restrained tears I'd allowed at the hotel, but deep, shaking sobs that left me folded over the sink. Every breath tasted of something final. For days, I drifted between work and home, like a shadow moving through water. Clients still called, reports still needed finishing, but my focus splintered. Numbers blurred. The sound of laughter in office hallways made me ache in ways I couldn't explain. I found myself staring at photographs on my desk. Me beside Travis at a Cape Cod fair, both of us holding melting ice cream cones and wondering how something so pure had turned into silence. Jasmine noticed. One night, after our volunteer shift at the Financial Literacy Center, she followed me into the parking lot umbrella, tilted against the drizzle. "You're doing that thing again," she said, holding your breath when you talk about them. "I'm fine," I told her the lie, automatic. "You're not," she said quietly. "And that's okay. You don't have to be." We stood there under the streetlight until the rain softened into mist. When she finally hugged me, it wasn't the kind of hug that said, "Cheer up." It was the kind that said, "Stay as long as you need." Back at my apartment, I opened the closet where a half-packed suitcase sat from a trip I'd promised myself years ago, a trip to Bali I never took because family obligations always won. I ran my hand along the worn handle. Maybe I thought it was time to stop postponing the things that were mine alone. Work filled the next weeks with routine precision. I poured myself into projects, stacking hours like bricks to build distance from Boston. Each morning, I arrived before sunrise, coffee in hand, pretending that diligence could muffle grief. My boss, Sarah, noticed the extra effort, but said nothing until one evening she leaned against my doorway. "You don't have to outrun pain, Mercedes," she said. "Sometimes it catches up and teaches you something." Her words lingered as the office emptied. I stared out at the dark curve of Lake Michigan, its surface gleaming with city lights. Maybe that was what this was, a lesson I hadn't wanted to learn. Spring arrived with slow mercy. The trees along the riverwalk bloomed pink and white petals scattering like quiet applause in the wind. I started walking after work, letting the air untangle my thoughts. I bought myself tulips at the Saturday market, bright yellow ones, and placed them in a glass vase by the window. Small rebellions of joy. Then one Tuesday morning, my mother called. Her voice carried that polished brightness again, the one she used for press statements. "Your brother is engaged," she announced. "Isn't that wonderful?" I gripped the phone tighter. I should have been happy for him. But the tone, too smooth, too rehearsed, told me what I needed to know. "That's great news," I said carefully. "When's the wedding? They're still finalizing the date," she replied. A hesitation followed, light but sharp. "You know how busy we all are with two families involved?" Her words fell into a pause so deliberate it felt scripted. I tried to keep my voice even. "Well, tell Travis, congratulations. I'd love to help if Amanda needs anything." "Oh, I don't think that'll be necessary," she said quickly. "Her family has everything handled." We talked for a few more minutes about nothing that mattered. Weather, charity events, the price of flights before she hung up. I stared at the blank screen, a faint ring still echoing in my ears. Something was wrong again, and this time I could feel it before I saw it. Over the next weeks, social media filled in what my family refused to say. There were photos of tuxedo fittings of Amanda standing beside my mother at a bakery tasting samples of pale pink cakes. Captions full of hearts and excitement. I scrolled through each image like a trespasser peering into a house where she used to live. I wrote Travis an email, warm, congratulatory, a little pleading. I told him how proud I was, how I couldn't wait to see him start this new chapter. His reply came the next day, 3 sentences long. "Busy with work and wedding prep. Hope you're doing well." The distance in his words felt colder than silence. I tried again, a week later. He didn't respond. Then one evening, as I was locking up my office, a message popped up from Natalie Chen, a friend from our Boston school days. "Just got Travis's save the date for June 12th. Can't wait to see everyone. Did yours arrive yet?" My hand went numb around the phone. The street below blurred into headlights and motion. I thanked her, said maybe mine was delayed. That night, I checked my mailbox 3 times. It stayed empty. I booked a flight to Boston anyway. Some part of me still believed in confronting things face to face and giving people a chance to do the right thing. I packed lightly, a navy dress, low heels, nothing too formal. When I arrived at the house that Saturday morning, the city felt as polished and distant as my childhood memories. Through the bay windows, I saw the brunch already in motion, waiters carrying trays, my mother directing them with that practiced gesture of hers. I rang the doorbell and stepped inside before anyone could decide otherwise. Every conversation stopped. My mother's glass hovered in midair. My father's eyes darkened like clouds over the harbor. "Mercedes," she said, each syllable drawn thin. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about the pre-wedding brunch," I replied. "Thought I'd surprise you." Amanda looked at Travis, confused. "You have a sister?" The words sliced through the silence. My mother's hand tightened on my arm as she led me toward my father's study. The room still smelled of cigars and leather, the same place he'd lectured us as children about ambition and composure. She shut the door behind us and turned, her expression caught between irritation and pity. "You weren't sent a card because you're not invited," she said. At first, I thought she was joking. I waited for the small smile that used to follow her sharpest remarks. It didn't come. "This wedding is very important," my father added, entering behind her. "Both families have reputations to consider. It's only for people who contribute to what we've built." I stood very still. "And I don't contribute." "You manage other people's money," he said, as if pronouncing a verdict. "You live in another city. You've chosen your own path now. Accept the consequences." My mother's voice softened in that false, gentle way she used when dismissing charity committees. "Sorry, dear. This event is only for the people we actually love." The sentence hit like glass breaking underwater, silent, absolute. Travis entered just then, drawn by the tension he could probably feel through the walls. He looked smaller somehow, though he tried to stand like our father. "It's easier this way, Mercedes," he said quietly. "You've never really fit." Easier. The word turned in my mouth like a stone. "Easier for who?" No one answered. I walked out before they could. The guests in the dining room glanced away as I passed, pretending to be occupied with their plates. Outside, the cold March air cut through my coat. The taxi driver looked at me through the mirror as I gave him the hotel address. "You okay, miss?" he asked. "Just drive, please." From the window, I watched the house recede, perfect shutters, trimmed hedges, nothing out of place. The kind of perfection that requires someone else's absence. That night in the hotel, I spread childhood photos across the bedspread, Cape Cod beaches, Christmas mornings, backyard picnics. Each one proof that I hadn't imagined the love we once had. I pressed my thumb against Travis's smile in one picture, the one where he'd lost his front tooth and laughed so hard he fell off the porch step. Outside wind rattled the windows. Somewhere below, a car alarm started and stopped. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, hearing their words again, only for the people we actually love. By morning, something inside me had gone still. Not empty, not broken, just still, like a tide pulling back before the next wave. I ordered coffee from room service, sat by the window, and watched the city wake. People crossed streets with purpose. Traffic lights blinked red to green. Life, uncaring, moved forward. My phone buzzed once on the table. Jasmine's name. A single message. "Whatever they said, it's not the truth about you." I stared at the words until my eyes blurred, then typed back. "I know. I just need some time." Outside, a faint hint of sunlight pressed through the clouds. I closed my eyes and breathed it in, knowing this was the moment everything would change, even if I didn't yet know how. Jasmine met me at the airport with a paper cup of coffee and a quiet kind of fury. She didn't ask what had happened. She'd already guessed. When she saw the way I moved, slow, deliberate, as if each breath cost something, she just said, "Let's go home," and I followed her through the gray light of morning into the waiting car. Back in Chicago, my apartment felt like a refuge and a reminder. The walls still held the warmth of the life I'd built on my own, yet the silence after the door closed pressed too tightly against my ribs. I unpacked nothing. The suitcase sat in the corner lid half open like it was waiting for an answer. For days, I did what I always did when pain had no outlet. I worked. I filled spreadsheets with neat columns of logic numbers that stayed where I put them. They never lied, never withdrew an invitation, never measured worth by the shine of a last name. Still, I kept losing my place. At the office, I'd catch my reflection in the window and not recognize the woman staring back. She looked composed, efficient, but her eyes were dimmed by something heavier than exhaustion. Nights were worse. The quiet stretched long, interrupted only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant roll of traffic. I'd pour a glass of wine, take a single sip, then set it down untouched. Sometimes I'd wake to find my phone still lit on the nightstand, open to the last text from my brother, 3 short sentences that managed to sound like a closed door. Jasmine started dropping by after work, bringing takeout and conversation about everything except family. She had that rare gift of filling a room without demanding space. One evening, she caught me staring at an unopened stack of mail. "You know," she said gently, "you don't have to prove to anyone that you can survive this. You already are." I wanted to believe her. But the hurt sat too deep, like an old echo that refused to fade. The weeks slid forward. Chicago thawed into spring. Trees along the Riverwalk unfurled pale green leaves, and couples filled the benches with the sound of new beginnings. I began to walk there after work, letting the breeze off the lake brush through my thoughts. I'd watch the water shift from steel gray to silver under the setting sun, and wonder how long it would take for the ache to soften into memory. Then, one morning, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten. "Mercedes," my mother said, her tone bright enough to scrape. "Your brother is engaged. Isn't that wonderful?" I steadied my voice. "That's great news." "When's the wedding?" "Oh, they're still finalizing the date," she said. A pause stretched thin between words. 2 prominent families, so many schedules. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Keep me posted. I'd love to help with planning." There was another pause, shorter this time. "Amanda's mother has everything under control," she said quickly. "But thank you for offering." After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone, the hum of the city muffled outside my window. Something in her tone, too practiced, too smooth, told me what my heart already feared. Still, I tried to believe this time would be different. Weeks passed. Photos appeared online, my mother and Amanda tasting cakes, Travis in a tuxedo fitting, smiles arranged like portraits in a museum. I sent Travis a congratulatory email anyway, full of warmth I didn't feel. His reply was polite and empty. "Busy with work and wedding prep. Hope you're well." Then Natalie, an old school friend, messaged me out of nowhere. "Just got Travis's save the date for June 12th. Has yours arrived yet?" I wrote back something about the mail being slow, but my hands were shaking. By the 3rd week with no invitation, the truth stopped pretending to be subtle. I booked a flight to Boston. I didn't warn anyone. I just needed to see it, needed to hear it from their own mouths if they'd truly erased me. The morning I arrived, the sky hung low and white over the city. A car carried me through streets lined with magnolias in bloom, their petals pale against the rain-dark branches. When the house came into view, its shutters freshly painted, I felt a pang that was half nostalgia, half dread. Through the wide front windows, I could see the dining room alive with movement waiters in pressed shirts, guests lifting champagne flutes. My mother stood near the table, directing them with the precision of an event planner. I rang the bell and stepped inside. The conversation stopped, as if someone had cut a string. My mother turned first, her smile freezing in place. Travis's hand tightened around his glass. "Mercedes," she said, the word sounding like an accident. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about the brunch," I said, evenly. "I thought I'd surprise you." Amanda, seated beside Travis, blinked in confusion. "You have a sister?" The silence that followed was worse than any shout. My mother's expression hardened. She reached for my arm. "Let's speak privately." The study hadn't changed. The same leather chairs, the same wall of legal volumes whose titles I'd memorized as a child while waiting for permission to speak. She closed the door with a practiced click. "You weren't sent a save the date because you're not invited," she said. I stared at her, trying to find the mother I used to imagine behind the sharp edges. My father entered, adjusting his cufflinks, as if preparing for a negotiation. "This event represents both families," he said. "We can't afford complications." Complications? My voice barely reached the space between us. "I'm his sister." Biologically, my mother replied yes. "But this wedding is for people who understand what our name stands for." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "And what do I stand for then?" "For choosing your own path," my father said. "Now you live with it." He glanced at his watch, signaling the end of whatever patience he'd rehearsed. My mother smoothed her blouse. "This event is only for the people we actually love," she said softly. The words landed with quiet precision, cruel in their calm. Travis appeared at the door, then drawn by the tension. He looked past me toward our parents, uncertain which side he was on. "It's easier this way, Mercedes," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "You've never really fit with what this family's about." Something in me gave way, not like a crack, but a release. "Easier for you. Maybe," I said. "Not for the people you pretend don't exist." Outside the door, voices murmured. Amanda's father asking if everything was all right. My father replied smoothly, "Just a small family matter." That phrase, the one he used to minimize every wound, echoed in my head as I walked past them all. The air outside was sharp with early spring. I didn't look back until the taxi turned the corner and the house disappeared behind a row of maples. It felt like watching the closing credits of a life that no longer included me. At the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed and spread a few old photographs across the white blanket. Cape Cod summers, Halloween costumes. Travis missing his front teeth and laughing against my shoulder. Each picture felt lighter than the moment it captured, as if memory itself were fading to protect me. I don't know how long I sat there before tears came slow, soundless, unstoppable. They weren't for the lost invitation, not really. They were for the girl who used to believe family meant safety, who thought love could be earned if she just stayed good enough. When the tears finally stopped, the sky outside had turned a dim shade of rose. I poured a glass of water from the carafe on the nightstand and watched the ripples settle. Somewhere in the stillness between one breath and the next, I understood that I couldn't go back, not to Boston, not to waiting for a kind of love that required permission slips and performance. I lay down, staring at the ceiling, until the room softened into gray. The last thing I remember before sleep was the faint hum of traffic below and a single sentence repeating in my mind. "This event is only for the people we actually love." Morning would come, and with it something quiet, but certain, the beginning of a different kind of freedom. Jasmine met me at the airport the next morning, holding out a cup of coffee so strong it could wake the dead. She didn't ask questions. She just looked at me for a long moment, her eyes full of the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. I think she knew the whole story before I even spoke. By the time we reached my apartment, she'd already decided she was staying until I fell asleep. For the first time in years, the word home meant something different. It wasn't the polished house in Boston. It was the quiet hum of my refrigerator, the creak in the floor by the window, the faint smell of rain coming through the screens. Still, the silence pressed on my chest so tightly that I could barely breathe. I went through the motions of life as if I were performing a role. I went to work, smiled in meetings, hit deadlines, said all the right things, but the sound of my own name felt strange in my mouth. I'd see my reflection in the elevator's steel walls, my face calm, composed, untouched, and think, this can't be what surviving looks like. At night, the city lights glowed against my windows like ghosts. I'd pour a glass of wine and never drink it. Sometimes I'd open the box of old family photos tucked in the bottom drawer, the ones from summers in Cape Cod and snowstorms in Boston, and stare until the images blurred. Every memory seemed to end in the same way, with my parents looking somewhere else. One evening, Jasmine dropped by with Thai takeout and refused to leave. We sat cross-legged on the floor cartons spread between us. You know, she said, picking up a spring roll, you don't have to earn love from people who never learned how to give it. Her words caught in the quiet like a small bell. I wanted to believe her, but I didn't know how yet. Days turned into weeks. The first buds appeared along the river walk, the air soft with the smell of new grass. I walked after work sometimes for hours just to feel movement again. The lake changed colors each evening, gray, then silver, then something close to peace. Then one Tuesday morning, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. "Your brother is engaged," she announced, her voice bright and careful. "Isn't that wonderful?" For a heartbeat, something hopeful stirred in me. "That's great news, Mom. When's the wedding?" She hesitated. "They're still finalizing the date. Coordinating between two families takes time." I nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Keep me updated, okay? I'd love to help if they need anything." "Oh, that won't be necessary," she said quickly. "Amanda's mother has it all in hand." After she hung up, I sat at my kitchen counter, fingers resting on the phone, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly too loud. Something in her tone, too smooth, too deliberate, made my stomach twist. A week later, photos began appearing on her social media page, Amanda, in a bridal shop, my mother, at a cake tasting, Travis being fitted for a tuxedo. No one had told me a thing. I sent Travis a message anyway, pretending I didn't notice. "Congratulations. I'm so happy for you both." He replied hours later. "Thanks. Been busy with work. Talk soon." That was all. Another week passed before a childhood friend, Natalie, messaged me. "Just got Travis's save the date for June 12th. Has yours arrived yet?" The world seemed to tilt. I stared at the message, typed back something about the mail being slow, and closed the app. That night, I checked my mailbox 3 times. Empty each time. By Friday, I had stopped pretending. I booked a ticket to Boston. No warning, no explanations, just a decision made quietly between one breath and the next. When the plane landed, the city looked exactly as I remembered, polished, proper, withholding. I took a cab to the old house. Through the wide windows, I saw caterers in black aprons arranging platters, while my mother stood in the center giving instructions. The world behind the glass looked warm, bright, complete. I rang the bell and stepped inside. Every conversation stopped. My mother's hand froze halfway to her glass. My father looked up from the end of the table, jaw tightening. "What are you doing here?" my mother asked, her smile sharp enough to cut. "I heard about the brunch," I said. "Thought I'd surprise you." Amanda looked from me to Travis. "You have a sister?" The room filled with a silence that weighed more than sound. My mother's hand closed around my arm, firm and cold. "Let's talk privately," she said, leading me toward my father's study. The moment the door shut, the air changed. The same heavy scent of leather, the same wall of law books lined like soldiers. She turned to me with that rehearsed calm. "You weren't sent a card because you're not invited?" I blinked. "You can't be serious. This wedding is very important," my father said, stepping from behind the desk as if delivering a verdict. "Both families have reputations to maintain. We can't risk complications." "Complications?" I repeated. "I'm his sister." "Biologically," my mother said lightly. "But this event is only for people we actually love." The words were too soft to be shouted and too cruel to be real. I stood there, hearing my heartbeat thudding in my ears, feeling the room shrink until there wasn't enough air to fill my lungs. Travis appeared at the doorway, drawn by the tension. He couldn't meet my eyes. "It's easier this way," he said quietly. "You've never really fit with what this family is about." I stared at him, waiting for the brother I once knew to surface. He didn't. Outside, I heard guests laughing, glasses clinking, the faint music of something exclusive. I realized then that I could stand there forever and never be seen. "I understand," I said finally, though my voice trembled. "You want a perfect picture? You just don't want me in it." I walked out before anyone could answer. Past the murmuring guests, past the polished wood and framed photographs, through the door that had never really been open. The air outside smelled of rain and early spring. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, watching the windows glow gold behind the curtains. Then I called a cab and told the driver to take me anywhere but there. At the hotel that night, I laid out the few photographs I'd kept, 2 children on a beach, laughing under a sky full of gulls. For a moment, I pressed my finger to the image, tracing the shape of our smiles, trying to remember what it felt like before love became a performance. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, listening to the hum of traffic below, hearing my mother's voice echo in the dark. Only for people we actually love. By morning, the ache had changed shape. It wasn't raw anymore, just heavy, like something I'd been carrying too long. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee and watched the city wake, the light breaking across rooftops. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the first small flicker of decision, the quiet knowledge that this chapter of my life was closing, and I would be the one to turn the page. The city outside my window looked softer than I remembered. Autumn had come quietly that year, painting the maples along the street in shades of amber and rust. From my kitchen, I could hear the faint hum of traffic, the distant whistle of a passing train, the kind of morning where even time seems to move a little slower, as if it's catching its breath. I stirred a pot of apple cider on the stove, letting the scent of cinnamon fill the air. Sunlight slipped through the blinds in warm ribbons, landing on the stack of plates I'd set aside for later. The day felt ordinary, and yet in its ordinariness there was peace. It had been nearly a year since Bali, a year since I'd watched the sun rise from a mountaintop and promised myself I'd stop seeking love from those who measured it in conditions. That promise had changed everything, not through some grand act of rebellion, but through the quiet decisions made every day since. When I returned to Chicago, I began rebuilding my life on my own terms. Work no longer defined me the way it used to. I still loved what I did, helping people manage their finances, teaching them to build stability. But it wasn't the whole of me anymore. I spent weekends volunteering again, teaching single mothers and retired workers how to read statements that used to intimidate them. Numbers had always been my language, but now they carried a different meaning, something practical, something human. Letters from Boston came sporadically at first. My mother's messages were brief and brittle. My father's were impersonal, typed as if dictated to his assistant. I read them without anger and then folded them away. They were artifacts of a world I'd already left behind. Travis, though he was different. His first email came 3 months after I'd returned. It wasn't an apology at first, just an admission. He'd entered treatment, was confronting debts that stretched wider than he'd wanted to see. The words were uneven, like someone learning to walk again. A few weeks later came another letter. This one, humbler, clearer. "You were right to say no," he wrote. "If you'd helped me, I wouldn't have stopped." I didn't respond right away. Healing, I'd learned, wasn't a door you flung open. It was something you approached slowly, checking the hinges first. Eventually, I wrote back. Simple words. "I'm glad you're getting help. Keep going." That small exchange became the start of something fragile and real. We began speaking once a week, brief calls that stretched longer over time. Sometimes he'd tell me about his therapy sessions or the new apartment he'd rented in Cambridge. Other times, we just talked about ordinary things, music recipes, the small victories that shape a life when you start over. When Thanksgiving approached, I sent an invitation without expectations. "You're welcome to join us." I wrote, no pressure. He said yes. The doorbell rang just before noon. Jasmine answered, greeting him with the same warmth she offered everyone she loved. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked into the living room. Travis stood there holding a pie, looking uncertain but sincere. He'd lost the polished sharpness he once carried like armor. His suit had been replaced by a plain sweater, his posture more humble, his eyes finally clear. "Hi, Mare," he said. The childhood nickname sounded strange and comforting all at once. "Hi," I replied, and for a heartbeat, we just looked at each other. The moment passed naturally. He joined the others, Jasmine, Marcus, and David, 2 of my colleagues, and a few neighbors who'd become like family over the years. The table was long and mismatched, the centerpiece, a simple arrangement of autumn branches and candles. We passed dishes back and forth, laughter rising and falling in waves. At one point, I looked across the table and caught Travis smiling at something Jasmine said. It was a real smile, unguarded, free of the tension that used to live between us. In that instant, I felt something shift quietly inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. We were both survivors of the same house, each learning to live differently now. After dinner, the air filled with the scent of pie and cooling cider. People wandered toward the balcony, coffee cups in hand. The sky above the city was streaked in gold and violet. Travis joined me there, both of us, leaning against the railing, the chill brushing our faces. "I never thought I'd have a holiday like this," he said softly. One that didn't feel like an act. I smiled. Neither did I. He nodded, looking out over the skyline. "Mom says I've changed too much. Dad barely speaks to me. But for once, that doesn't scare me. Maybe that's the point." I rested my hands on the railing, feeling the metal cool against my palms. Change always scares the people who don't want to face themselves. He glanced over, a quiet gratitude in his eyes. "You taught me that by walking away." I didn't understand it then. I took a slow breath. "You didn't have to. You just had to see that I meant it." The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of music from another building. The lights below shimmered on the river, the surface bending and reforming like memory itself. We didn't say anything for a long while. Some silences don't demand to be filled. Later, after everyone left, I stood in the doorway watching the last candles flicker down. The apartment was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, now warm, alive, like a held breath released. I thought of all the places I had tried to belong, all the rooms where love had felt conditional. None of them compared to this, the simple contentment of being seen and safe in my own space. When Travis left for the airport the next morning, he hugged me awkwardly, then with more certainty. "I don't know if Mom or Dad will ever understand," he said, "but I hope someday they'll see what we found. Maybe I told him, and if not, that's their story to carry." He nodded, eyes bright with something like peace. "Thank you for not giving up on me completely." I smiled. "You did the work, Travis. You finally chose yourself." After he left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the snow begin to fall over the city. The flakes drifted slow and steady, melting against the glass. Chicago looked softer under the quiet white. Its edges blurred its lights gentler. The following week, I returned to my routine morning walks along the lake, evenings teaching workshops at the community center. Some of the women there reminded me of myself years ago, tired, determined, trying to build something steady from the pieces left behind. I watched them learn, watched the light return to their faces, and understood that healing, in its simplest form, is just learning to keep choosing life. One night, I received a postcard in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, but uncertain. Bali, the front read in soft watercolor script. On the back, in Travis's handwriting, I wanted to see what helped you find peace. "You were right. It's beautiful here. Thank you." I smiled, running my thumb across the ink, imagining him standing where I once stood, letting the water and wind do their quiet work. Maybe we both needed to see that freedom wasn't distance, it was release. That evening, I lit a candle on my balcony and let the flame flicker against the fading light. The air smelled faintly of snow and wood smoke. Somewhere below, a child laughed, the sound echoing through the courtyard. Peace didn't come to me all at once. It arrived the way dawn does, softly across time, until one day you realize the darkness has thinned. Some wounds don't fade because we forgive. They fade because we stop needing them to prove we survived. If this story spoke to you, tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know. And if you've ever had to build your own version of family, remember to keep it close. Thanks for spending this time with me, and may peace find its way to you too.